transportation and logistics industry is the second largest contributor to carbon emissions globally. Uddhav, how does Lynkit help companies have more transparent and resilient supply chains at the same time driving towards net zero objectives?
When we started back in 2017, we realized that supply chain was just very disaggregated. The trick was understanding all of these different parts in supply chain, understanding how all the goods actually move. They move in a container, they move in a truck, they move in a bike, and then they finally reach you. And what we realized was that just having one product wasn't enough. We had to have a whole stack of products. And that meant doing last mile optimization. It meant having a product for a container terminal. It meant having a warehouse management system. And what we simply focused on was helping companies cut costs. Because when you speak to a company and they say, okay, why should I use your product? The basic thing they're concerned about is cost savings. And with that cost savings, the basic cost savings we were able to give them was give them, cost savings through visibility, help them increase the efficiency of their people, and as well as utilize less energy. Now, that less energy could be fuel. It could be even if you're looking at electrification.
From a competitive standpoint, there's so many players in logistics and supply chain solutions. How do you see yourself differentiated long-term with Lynkit?
We actually have so many competitors. We have 6 different products, right? And with most of the companies, what we saw was they focused on one and they just had one set of competitors. But that's not what supply chain is. Supply chain is actually the 6 products combined into one. So even though companies have multiple departments for handling all of these 6, eventually it's one top line, it's one bottom line. And it's one product moving across them all. So with a lot of companies that have large ERPs or enterprise resource planning, it's this tool that simply just helps you collate a lot of data, look at where a product is coming from, what are you spending on it, how do you need to dispatch it, and all of that.
And big companies are in it.
And big companies are
SAP.
Correct. The basic difference and what we saw was that most of these companies just focused on the ERP side rather than the IoT side as well. And that's where we became a big differentiator. It hasn't been slow growth in terms of revenue. It's been slow growth in terms of what I look at growth. We've still done a 10x revenue in the last two years. So we've still seen growth happening quickly, but now is when everything is really coming together.
One of the things you're able to do as well in terms of optimization is improve utilization, help companies reduce costs through just improvements across their whole supply chain. How do you measure that and help them achieve that?
The basic pillar that we realized was actually IoT. And what we noticed was the biggest deterrent there to actually being able to make a lot out of that technology was where you got that data from. Now, if eventually you're going to be dependent on me to be entering in that data, I need to be someone who's really smart, right? I need to be able to enter in the right data at the right time. And that's something that we just realized was a very big flaw in the entire system. So we start focusing a lot on the IoT side, because what IoT simply does is help sort of make that data entry into the ERP in an automated manner. We told companies that, okay, if you have your big ERP and you don't want to replace it, that's completely fine. You spend, hundreds and millions of dollars on it. Why not spend just a couple of dollars on my device and I'll automate this data entry process for you. That's how we actually started. So we started off in the GPS tracking space. We use RFIDs to automate inventory counts, to automate and know how many kilometers a vehicle covered. And that's what we did. And then slowly, we actually became the ERP makers ourselves.
Were you integrating initially with existing ERP systems?
That's the first thing that we did.
Ultimately to lift and replace.
Ultimately, yes, absolutely.
Why is the Hyperledger Fabric blockchain the right underlying platform and infrastructure to build on top of?
So Hyperledger Fabric is super important for companies, right? Or blockchain is super important for companies, but not in all the use cases. We initially also actually felt that it was going to be applicable in more use cases than we actually, that companies actually did agree with us on. And so it was a bit of a learning process, and it took about 2 to 3 years for us to really get that right. So what we realized was that only when a company wants to actually bring multiple stakeholders onto a single platform, and they're going to be sort of maybe having some sensitive data that's going to actually be sort of, worked on the platform, or they're going to be doing some kind of financial transactions on the platform, that's where blockchain would make an impact. So, and the reason why we took Hyperledger Fabric was because of B2B. Every company is very concerned about their data privacy. They're concerned about who can see that data, who can't. So public blockchain went out the window on day one.
Uddhav, what's an example of a deployment you have that's taking full advantage of all the capabilities of Lynkit?
So I would say our container terminal automation system. I think that was our holy grail. And it took 3 years to develop it. We had to make the entire hardware in-house. And a lot of people looked at us and said, you're a software company primarily, or a system integrator. That's a little silly. But what we realized was that there wasn't any other way to do it. So we have 192 sensors on this product. We've designed the hardware ourselves. We've designed the PCB ourselves, the schematic layout, the firmware, the kernels, everything we did in-house, and then we integrated it with our own software application, which was a mobile application, a web application that gave access to everyone. So the yard operators on the ground, the admin staff, the HR staff, even the shipping liners and the transporters that were using this, that were using the port terminal as customers.
In terms of data inputs, you're collecting upwards of 1 billion data inputs per day using that system.
Yeah. These machines are very, very complex machines, and they're moving these containers left and right? So what you had to actually do was you had to not just look at where the container is, but also you had to think about which direction it's placed in. How can I optimally stack these containers to try and minimize the fuel consumption as well? So visibility is just the starting point. It's what you do with the visibility that actually matters to a customer as well. Because if it's just visibility, eventually, and especially in a country like India where there's so many people, you can get that visibility just by having people stand around. But what you have to do is you have to deploy AI, you have to deploy really advanced technologies to try and get a better output out of that visibility.